Clearwater Economic Development Association in the 5 counties of North Central Idaho. And in case you're not sure which webinar you've joined today, you've had a few too many Zoom webinars already, you're at using data as a foundation for your plan, which is part of CEDA and the Panhandle Area Council's Moving the Connectivity Needle in North Idaho webinar series. We're thrilled that you're here to join us today, and we've got a lot to get through, so we'll go ahead and keep things moving along. The goal of this series is to increase the knowledge and capacity of North Idaho communities on broadband. We hope that you'll walk away from today's workshop with a better understanding of broadband and your individual, as well as everyone's collective role in shaping the future of broadband here in North Idaho. This is the first, oh, no, this is not the first. This is the third of our workshop series, and we have added an additional workshop here, so we're up to 6. The registration for this workshop, I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat, but if you would like to join us for the rest of the series, if this is your first one, we certainly welcome you to. If you missed the first 2 and would like to get caught up there, we would be happy to share the links to any of those, and feel free to go through them at your pleasure. For those of you joining us right on time, a few reminders. This webinar is being recorded. It will be made available after the fact via a link. We'll send it to the email you registered with on your registration site. So if you did not register, maybe you're sitting in with somebody and sharing their screen, make sure you get us your email, and we'll get you the follow-up slide deck and links to this. Go ahead and please keep your microphone muted during the presentations unless you're speaking. We do have some breaks built into the series, but go ahead and take one when you need one. And if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with our speakers, go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those and make sure that we get to them at times that make sense throughout the presentation. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn the mic over to my co-host for today, Dorian Combrick of the Panhandle Area Council.
Good morning. Thanks, Angie. Good morning to everybody out there today. Thank you again for being here today to be part of our Data as a Foundation to Your Plan, the third in our webinar series. I'm Dorian Combrick, and I'm the Community Development Specialist for Panhandle Area Council serving the 5 northern counties of Idaho. We here at Panhandle Area Council and the folks at Clearwater Economic Development Association are very excited to have Karen Perry today. She's the Senior Policy Analyst from BroadbandUSA, and she's going to present her expertise regarding broadband data and all the available resources that are at our fingertips. This information is going to be invaluable to your community during the planning process, and it can be a great resource when you're looking to apply for funding as well. So during our next regional discussions that we're going to be holding on December 17th, Karen's also going to be helping us take an even deeper look into the data so that you can actually come away and knowing what your local data is like and having a richer understanding of your own community's strengths and needs. With that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Ms. Karen Perry from BroadbandUSA. Karen is a Senior Policy Analyst with the National Telecommunication and Information Administration's BroadbandUSA program at the U.S. Department of Commerce. She's worked on broadband projects from a range of perspectives: nonprofit, commercial, philanthropic, and governmental. As a Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Karen worked to improve broadband for public libraries. She has over 25 years of experience in telecommunications, working with Bell Laboratories, AT&T, and related firms. She's worked in rural communities across the country from Mississippi to Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and throughout the Northwest, always with local stakeholders and usually through partnerships with USDA or with public libraries. Ms. Perry holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Washington and a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Cornell University. She's passionate about developing local solutions that leverage data, are informed by community priorities, and are powered by partnership. Thank you for being here with us today, Karen.
Thanks very much for having me here today. Angie's going to help me with the slides, and so we can go to the next one. Well, I'm pretty excited about this presentation for you today. First off, because I do love talking about data. You guys have already figured that out about me. And also, I particularly like this group. In addition to that, we also have some special guests today joining us from around the country, including some of the people that I've already worked with in Nevada and Louisiana. So I also want to welcome all of you to this event as well. Thank you to our Idaho friends for welcoming our extra guests as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about what's in store for you in our data presentation today. You can hear me okay? Yep. So first off, I'm going to give you an overview of really the three major data sets that the federal government offers that will support your broadband planning. It's really a great place to start, and it can make your work easy. And so I want to kind of make sure that you understand those data sets because it makes it easier to work with them. And then I'm going to highlight both federal and non-federal tools so that you can use them more easily. Then we're going to demonstrate the tools pretty quickly today, but make sure that you have all the links that you need so that you can access them. And then at our work session later on, we're going to play with them a little bit more and make sure that it's very easy for you to get a handle on your own data. Really, the fun part is looking at your data and kind of playing with it and making sure that you understand the nuances of the data so that you can put yourself in the middle of the data and understand what it means to you and how you can use it effectively in making the case for what you want to make, whether that's a business case or a grant application or going to your city council or telling a story or working with a service provider. It's really using the data for what you need it to do. As you know, data is not data in itself. Data is what you use to get something. And so I'm about helping you use that data to get what you need. And so that's what we're going to do. Next slide. So the three major data sets that I'm going to talk about are the NTIA Internet Use Survey, the American Community Survey, and the FCC Broadband Deployment and Subscription Data. So the first two of those are consumer survey data. And so that's when we ask people what they think about things. And the third one, the FCC data set, is a regulatory data set that's collected by the FCC from service providers. So the first two are survey data, and the third one is regulatory data. So very, very different data sets. And I'm going to start with the NTIA Internet Use Survey. Next slide. Back one. So many people oftentimes when they're talking about computer and internet use, they quote the Pew Research Center. I am a big fan of the Pew Research Center. When I was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, one of the great projects I was able to do was actually to fund the Pew Research Center to do a survey for us, a 3-year study for us for the libraries. And it was really a pleasure to work with Lee Rainey at the Pew Research Center. One of the great things about Pew is that they're fast to the field and they do a lot of research. But when the Pew Research Center does a study, when you hear Pew Research Center says this or Pew says that, their survey is usually 2,000 to 4,000 households. Our survey of computer and internet data is 52,000 households. The reason that we're able to survey 52,000 households whenever we do a survey, which is every 2 years, is because our survey is appended to another survey that is called the CPS, the Consumer, oh my God, why can't I, the Current Population Survey. And the Current Population Survey is the way that the US Census Department calculates the unemployment rate. And it's kind of an unusual survey. So the way that the US Census Department, so the Census Department does a ton of different surveys. And the way that they calculate the unemployment rate is it's a relationship-based survey. So once they decide that you're part of the random sample survey that they're going to use to calculate the unemployment rate, they call you up and they ask you to be part of that survey sample for like 3 months. And so they say, I'd like to get information from you, and I'm going to call you every month for 3 months. And I'm going to ask you about your employment status. And so they call you this month and the next month and the next month. And one of those months, they're going to ask you 50 supplemental questions about computer and information, computer and internet use. And those 50 questions will go into a lot of information about computers and devices. And that's where we offer this supplemental information that gives us a lot of data on this depth of information. So we've been doing this for 25 years. That gives us the opportunity to be very rigorous in how we gather data and what we know about it. So it means that when you look at this data, you can count on its accuracy. It is also, it's reliable at the state level, but it's not reliable at the neighborhood or community level. So very rigorous, very accurate, very long-standing, but it's state level and national level data. And it covers devices, technology, locations of use, online activities, reasons people don't use the internet, and privacy and security. The response rate for this data, 85%. Because once the Census Department puts you in this survey category, they kind of show up like 8 times. Next slide. So let me tell you what we've learned from this survey data. We've learned a lot about where people use the internet, in particular at home. Urban users right now are about 74% are using the internet. People use the internet more at home if you're in an urban area than in a rural area. That's the rural-urban divide you've heard about. Right now it's 74% in urban areas, 68% in rural areas, as compared to the overall internet use at home, which is 73%. This is the 2019 data. Next slide. But if you look at households with children at home, that whole chart moves up and it tightens up. Now you've got 88% in urban areas and 85% in rural areas. So it tightens right up and it moves up. So when you're deploying, you know that your early adopters are going to be people with children, because that's who more quickly adopts using the internet, because we want our kids to have access to the internet no matter where we are. Next slide. There's still a divide by income, and it's one of the most significant divides in internet use, particularly internet use at home. If you make over 100K, 82% of households adopt the internet at home. If you make under 25K, it's only 57% of households. And then the divide splits throughout those income levels. Next slide. There's also a significant divide based on education level, and that's also pretty significant. So it's about 85% if you're a college graduate, and 62% if you're if you have no diploma at all. Next slide. And there is a divide based on race and ethnicity. And at the lowest end of that divide is American Indians and Alaskan Natives. And they really kind of have a double whammy, because those also tend to be people who are in the most rural and remote areas of the country. And that's sort of one of our most disadvantaged groups in terms of broadband access. Next slide. So the divides that we see kind of across the deployment area are by income, by education, by place, by race and ethnicity, by disability status, and by age group, where seniors are also least likely to adopt. Next slide. I just want to highlight some of the other areas that you're going to find in this data set. There's also information about where people use the internet. This slide's a little bit hard to look at, but the blue line is people. This is all about where people use the internet, and the blue line is people who are children, ages 6 to 17, and then the gold line is adults, ages 18 or older. And so on the top line, you can see that Everybody uses the internet at home. And then sort of in the middle, the second line basically says that really only 39% of adults reported that they use the internet at work. And I was surprised that in 2019, it was reported that only 55% of people reported that students were using the internet at school. And another one that surprised me was, if you go to that gold line at the bottom, only 51% of adults reported using the internet while traveling. Next slide. This one is about the type of internet services that people use. And so this one, the bold or kind of bright blue line is indicating that people use both a mobile line and a wired line. So have a cell phone and have a wired connection at home. And if you look at the big line at the bottom that says 77 on the bottom, that means if you make 100K, you happen to have a cell phone and a wired connection at home. Big surprise. And if you go way up at the top, that one is kind of the surprise for me, because if you make less than 25K, 39% or 36% of the people who make less than 25K still manage to have both a cell phone and a wired connection at home. So that's kind of the cup half full version of that box up there. But on the flip side of it, 35% of the people in that bucket, that's the navy blue line up the top, had no internet at all. So if you kind of look at that bucket right up at the top, the navy blue line says 35% of the people under 25K have no internet at all. But then 36% of the people somehow managed to end up with both a cell phone and a wired connection, which is kind of an interesting line. And then the gold line there is people who are really managing to do everything with only a cell phone. And that's 15% of people in the under 25K line. And then if you're if you're over 100K, it's only 5% of the people. It's a ton of data, more than you need. But let me go to one more slide in this section. And this is a section about the kinds of activities that people do online. You know, I don't love this slide because I think there wasn't that much change between 2017 and 2019. I'm really looking forward to the next data set because I think we're going to see wild changes in our next data set. What this shows is that between 2017 and 2019, they showed really just a modest change in people's conference calling and teleworking habits. Conference calling went from 47 to 51%. Teleworking went up just a percentage or two. So let's go to the next slide, and I want to ask you a couple of questions as to what you're predicting for the future. I pulled some other data from some other sources about more recent changes we've seen in how people are teleworking and working at home. So our survey shows that about 24% of people worked remotely via the internet in 2019. But Census does another survey that they call the Pulse survey, where they kind of go out with these quick surveys like every week. And so their Pulse survey found that about 36.6 or 37% of people were teleworking in September of 2020. And then a different poll that was done by Gallup found that 62% of people were working from home, which isn't teleworking, that's working from home. It's sort of a different question, in April of this year. And that was according to Gallup, double the number of people who had done that, the work the month before. And so Angie's got a poll for you. And we wanted to ask you a question about not just working from home, but making money at home. We wanted to know if you use the internet in some way to earn money from your home. We wanted to know, do you work remotely at home for yourself, for someone else, which is what I do, or if you're an entrepreneur, and if you're an entrepreneur, we're kind of curious as to what your business is. We wanted to know if you use the internet for agriculture, or if you are part of the share economy like Airbnb or Uber. I do that as well. I don't drive a cab, I have Airbnb. If you're in finance or banking, or if you in some other way use the internet to make money at home. And if you want to elaborate in the chat, we'd love your feedback on that too. Angie, I'm not seeing the responses, which means probably that I might have trouble getting control later on when it's time for me to run the slides.
Oh, am I the only one who can see the responses while it's in progress? Looks like the majority right now, we have 24 people who say they work remotely for somebody else. We have a couple of.
Wait a minute. You'll show the responses when you're ready to show them. You'll show them when you'll show them when you're ready.
Okay.
So you can. I think you just have to publish them. Oh, I have to put my response in. I can vote. Okay, can you publish it?
Can I publish it without ending the polling would be the question. So we have 33 people who have voted so far.
Okay.
So you will give you about another minute if you haven't already voted, and then I'll end the poll and publish it.
Oh, newsletter, Mary Kay, crypto farming and network security. And if anybody wants to go off, well, we'll wait until the poll closes and then ask you guys to talk a little bit about what you do to make money online. Photography. Okay. Wow. So 82% of us are working remotely for somebody else. 12% are entrepreneurs. We have nobody who is in agriculture right now. 3% are part of the share economy. I think that might be me. And then 9% in finance, and 9% are doing something else. And does anybody want to take themselves off mute and talk a little bit about what something that they do to make money online, or what it means to them? Okay,
I'll jump in there, Karen. This is Andrew Menser.
Hi, Andrew.
Good morning. Well, with COVID, obviously, I work remotely mostly. I'd say 99% of the time these days, the work we've been able to achieve this year has been remote, whether it's meetings like this, business engagement meetings, broadband planning meetings, housing meetings, workforce development, recreation pathways. We can do all of the community development ecosystem online. I manage my real estate assets primarily online, all my finance banking. I saw somebody had crypto in there. I dabble in that as well. And so it's incredible how productive this all can be remotely these days. And, you know, COVID's terrible, but it really has forced the hand of these efficiencies. And in that regard, I think it's going to change the world in a good way.
I should write that quote down as well. Anybody else have a comment?
Yes, this is Jose Matanani. I was just going to add in there that, you know, I work from home online. I've, in my past career, I managed 2 of the tribally owned telcos in the nation. There's only 9 in the currently right now. And I also work for Nez Perce tribe with their endeavors as a broadband connectivity to their serving area, and also working with Alaskan natives in Alaska with their new application for the 2.5 spectrum. Those folks are really remote, and you know my passion is you know the most needy frontier areas, rural markets. Anyway, this is good information that I share with others that you know collaborate with the local folks, the state, and the providers there in the unserved areas.
Jose, you're doing important work.
Thank you.
I'll give you the opposite side of the coin. I work with multiple businesses around the country, and one of the things that I've seen with this quote working remotely is that whole loss of human interaction. And, you know, the Zoom makes it does help. At least we can typically see each other's faces as we're communicating, but I'm at the other end of the spectrum, to be honest. I'm not convinced that productivity has increased. If anything, I absolutely believe it's gone down. And I think some folks are very well wired to work remotely and they do fine, but that's not the norm. And I really do attribute a lot of that just to that lack of peer-to-peer, face-to-face communication. So I think it's been a wonderful help as we've gone through COVID, but I think the proof's still going to be in the pudding once COVID's behind us and we see what really happens with business around the country, around the continent.
Ron, I won't argue with you. I wrote my Christmas newsletter in paper last night, and one of the sections that my family and I collaborated on was things we miss. And boy, we had plenty of things we miss that aren't going to come back that we're definitely worried about. There's things to be thankful for, but there's a lot that's not better too. I'm going to go to the next section because there's a lot more data to talk about. Thank you for sharing. Can you guys go to the next slide? Oh, we did that one. So the next data set is actually my absolute favorite data set. It's the American Community Survey. Now this is a consumer survey. Next slide. So you, I'm sure, have heard about the decennial census. So the decennial census is when the U.S. Census Bureau goes out and does a short survey of everybody in the country. They only do that every 10 years, but the largest random sample survey that the U.S. Census Bureau does, and I think it might be the largest random sample survey that anybody does in the world, is called the American Community Survey. And when I say largest random sample survey, the survey is 3.5 million households a year, every year. And they do it on a rolling basis. And after a period of 5 years, they have reached 17 million households. And then the statisticians back at the Census Bureau take that sample size of 3.5 million households, and they do a lot of math on that sample size of 3.5 million households. And they're able to make estimates for all 3,142 counties, for tribal areas, and for population centers as small as 20,000 households, and for geographic areas down to the tract and block levels. And so I mentioned tract and block, so that means we have to talk census language. So in census divides the whole country up into blocks. And blocks are kind of based on how many people live in an area. And so a block is usually roughly 300 people, sometimes like 600 people. So in a city, a block is like maybe a city block. In a, rural area, a block could be 10 square miles. In Alaska, a block could be the size of the state of Delaware. So blocks vary very significantly depending on where you are in the country. Geographically, but blocks combine to block groups, and they combine to tracts, and then they combine into counties and states and divisions. As you can kind of see from that little figure there, everything else is different because communities are different. So Laura Arvin's here from Louisiana, they have parishes. You've got counties and subdivisions. Everything, tribal areas are different from states. So everything is different in terms of how communities are combined. But we combine blocks to block groups to tracts. And you're going to see when we do some of the work later, I'm going to focus on tracts because roughly tracts are like neighborhoods, and you'll see how that works when we look at communities. Next slide. So the cool thing about the American Community Survey is that it has this huge survey, huge data set, and every year they issue fresh data. And it covers a lot of different topics. So there's about 35 different topics. It covers age, density of housing, number of children, how far people commute, their education level, income, poverty, industry, housing type. And for the past 3 years, they've also included device type, internet use, internet subscriptions, and cell phone use. And the data is refreshed every year, and today's the anniversary date. Today, on December 10th, is the date that new data came out. So the data that I'm showing you, because I made my slides before today, is the data from the ACS release 2014 to 2018. But I'm pretty excited because today's December 10th, and today we got whole new data. So if you go on to the website links that I'm showing you today, the data.census.gov website, you'll be able to see the December 10th data. New slide. So because this is a consumer survey, you have to understand kind of how the question were asked. So they ask, do you have a computer or not? And then, do you have an internet subscription? Do you have broadband of any type? Do you have wireline such as cable, fiber, or DSL? Do you have a cell phone? Do you have a cell phone data plan? Do you have only a cell phone data plan? Do you have satellite service? Do you have only cell phone data? Do you have only cell phone? Do you have only satellite service? Do you have dial-up? Do you have no internet subscription? Do you have access other than do you have access without an internet subscription, or do you have no internet access? Next slide. So let me kind of give you a picture of how that kind of looks. And I'm going to use Idaho County as an example. So when you say, do you have broadband of any type in Idaho County, based on the 2018 data, 64% of people in Idaho County said they have broadband of any type. That compares to 80% of people in the US. So 80% of people in the US say they have broadband of any type. 67% of people in Idaho County say they subscribe to broadband. But when you say, do you have fixed broadband, that means cable, fiber, or DSL. Now in Idaho County, it goes all the way down to 35%, 35.7, whereas in the US overall, it's 67.9%. So big gap. So half the people in Idaho County have wireline broadband compared to, I mean, the people in Idaho County have half as much wireline broadband as they do overall in the rest of the US. And why is that? It's because a lot more people have satellite service. It's 29.5, or basically 30% of people use wireline compared to about 5.9% overall. And then do you have cell phone data plan? In that case, the people in Idaho County are very similar to the national average, just a little bit less, 6.8%. I also want to point out the margin of error that's there. The margin of error for the do you have broadband of any type, it's plus or minus 3%. That's not bad for a small rural area. And that's because it's that large sample size. And so large sample size, they show up at your house, they call you 7 times, show up at your house once. They're very serious once you're part of that random sample size. Next slide. There's a little bit of a fake out though, because again, I told you that the fixed broadband subscription, wireline subscription, was 35.7% in Idaho County. But that was the average across all of Idaho County. But Idaho County is not the same across the whole county. It's made up of tracts. And so those are the neighborhoods. And so the picture on the left shows you the tracts, the census tracts in Idaho County. And if you look across the tracts within Idaho County, the actual range of wireline subscription varies according to the tracts, and it goes as low as 16.5%. That would be the red section on to the east, and as high as 42%. That would be the blue section to the left, to the west. Next slide.
Karen, just for your own information, that big, large section is mainly federal lands. I know many in Idaho County and around us would know that, but you probably wonder, and that's why.
Yes, yeah, and when we look at it on the map, we'll see that it's going to be, you know, very it'll be low density. And what's the town, Christine? You told me before. What's the town that's in the blue section?
I have to stop and think. There's a number. There's Grangeville's in there.
Oh, it's Grangeville.
Yeah, and Whitebird.
Yeah, I think it's Grangeville.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, next slide. The other information that's in this same data set is information on device ownership. This is real helpful if you're trying to get look at getting computers to your kids. So in like if you're looking at the homework app, so it's information on do you have there's information on do you have a desktop computer, smartphones, tablets, or other devices in the household. Next slide. So I told you that the response rate for the NTIA household use survey, NTIA internet use survey, was 85%. And this survey reaches 3.5 million households every year. I'm kind of curious, what do you think the response rate is for this survey? And I'm asking you for the average over the 5 years, because it is actually different every year. But what do you think the response rate is for the last 5 years average? Scott, don't you vote? It's not fair when I tell you the answer, Scott. Well, Scott knows the answer. The average over the past 5 years was 95%, which I find just amazing. But those of you who guessed 85% also have a little bit of inside knowledge, because it did go down just a little bit this past year. It was just a little bit lower last year, which I think is interesting. I think it might have had something to do with all the talk about a citizenship question, which is interesting because this survey does happen to have a citizenship question on it. Even though the decennial census doesn't have that question on it, there has always been one on the American Community Survey. But it is a 95, it's like 96, 97, 92%, and it averaged out over this past 5 years to 95%. So again, huge sample size plus 95% response rate. That's why you've got such a small margin of error. And that's why you'll find that this data set is going to be so helpful for you as a place to start. If you take this data set and you add it to your local knowledge, it's probably something you can work with. And when we talk about the data, I can show you some ways that you can work with it. And you add it to your local stories, things that you already know about your community, and you can say, you know, I know something about this that's going on in my community. I know something this going on in my tribe. And then you pull this data in to back up something you already know. It becomes very powerful. Next slide. And I'm going to talk about the third data set. So the third data set is the Federal Communications Form 477 broadband deployment and subscription data. Completely different data set. So the first two data sets were consumer data sets. The third data set is a regulatory data set. So you might know that there's two telecommunications kind of branches in the federal government. So we're NTIA, we're part of the executive branch. The FCC is a regulatory body. They're really, really big and have money. We're really, really small and we don't have any money. And so we're both very, very different agencies. As a regulatory body, the FCC has a responsibility to collect data from the carriers about their broadband deployment. And they collect a lot of data, and part of that authorization includes this Form 477 data, and that's what people call it. And so I will give you an overview of some of the pieces of that data that is part of that record, and some ways that I think you can use it. I know this is a bit of an eye chart. I put it in here because there's some definitions here that are a little bit helpful for you to have. So there's kind of four major components of the FCC data set that I think are helpful to know about. So the first data set is the fixed broadband deployment data set. That's the one we're pretty much going to focus on. So this is data collected from the fixed broadband, the facilities-based carriers. Oddly enough, the facilities-based carriers includes the satellite carriers. At the beginning of the call, we were talking about the RDOF fund, the Rural Digital Opportunity. You might have to help me. The Rural Digital Opportunity Fund.
Rural Digital Opportunities Fund, RDOF.
Thanks. And so that is a fund that is associated with, that went to those facilities-based carriers. And I'm off my game here. So the first one is the fixed broadband deployment data. And that is about, usually you think of it as, cable, fiber, DSL, but it also includes satellite. The second one is about mobile or cellular data. And so that would be 4G, 5G, and eventually 5G. The third data is a little bit different. It kind of goes back to the first one, and it's basically it's subscription data, and it's about broadband subscription associated with the first one, associated with fixed broadband deployment. And then the last one is not actually collected from the carriers. It's a report that the FCC is obligated to produce every year that basically summarizes all of the above. And so it's their report to the public and to Congress that summarizes how we're doing on broadband deployment overall. So it's encouraging that the deployment is reasonable and deployment and that advanced telecommunications capability is available to all Americans. It's an important report because it's, fixed wireless is part of the first one. It's part of the first report. And so those are kind of the 4 buckets. So next slide. So the fixed broadband deployment data, or the Form 477 data, this is in the first section, is submitted by the carriers twice a year. And within this one, there's actually 2 different buckets. The first one is for residential, and the second one is for business. In the case of residential, the carriers provide information on their advertised upload and download speed. For business, they provide information on their committed upload and download rates. But in both cases, they provide block level information, and they provide information on the technologies that are offered: fiber, DSL, fixed wireless, cable, satellite, or other. And they submit that again to the FCC twice a year. Next slide. Most people like to look at this information on a map. I tend to like to look at this information in a table. And so I'm still in Idaho County, and let me show you how I like to read this table. So the first column is the service provider. The second column is the technology. The third column is the number of blocks that are served in that county. The next column is the percentage of the coverage in the county. The next one is the advertised download, and the next one is the advertised upload speed. So if you read it across now, First Step Internet is offering fixed wireless, and they're covering more than 1,100 blocks, which is 23% of that county. And their advertised download speed is 12 meg, and advertised upload speed is 4 meg. So we know how fixed wireless works. And anybody who offers fixed wireless will tell you that they're not going to cover all 1,100 blocks. They're covering whatever they can cover in those 1,100 blocks. It's a point-to-point service. It's not going to go through all those trees. They're covering service, whatever they can cover, whenever you have line of sight, whatever they can reach. So that's not going to mean you get service to every house in those blocks. So I would never mentally color all those blocks covered. You cover them, what you can cover in those blocks. And then the next one is CenturyLink. I'm going to drop down to the CenturyLink, which is DSL. 585 blocks, or 11%, they're advertising 100 megs download and 20 megs upload. It's DSL, long loops, probably been there a while. We know how long loops work in rural areas that haven't probably been invested in for a while. Do you think you're getting 100 megs? Okay. So when you read it in a table form, you kind of know a little bit more what you're looking at. Similarly, I can look at this and I can say, I don't see anybody there with fiber. So you can look at this and you can say, is there somebody there I can partner with? Is there an opportunity to expand? Is there so if somebody's not listed, it could be that I messed up when I was making the table because I was trying to fit it on the page, because I was trying to, so I better double check my typing, and we can do that when I do the demo. But it also could be that that the provider was too small to report, or it could be that the provider didn't implement until after the reporting date. So the reporting date is, that's a cutoff date for reporting. So if you have a relatively new implementation, then perhaps they didn't implement till after the reporting date. So we'll see that when we do the demo, how to explore that. But you can tell a lot of information, and you can tell a lot of information about possible partnerships. So one way to look at this is, you can call up these folks and you can ask, can I get this service? Can we do better? What do you have planned for the future? This is a good way to invite partnerships, because this is the information of record with our regulator. And so it's a good way to start conversations by looking at what is filed with the FCC. Next slide. This this sheet comes from the FCC annual report. So one of the things that it says in the FCC says in their annual report is that 93.5% of the U.S. population has access to fixed broadband at a rate of 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, advertised. But the same report also says that only 85.3% of Idaho has access to those speeds. Now, we already know that the FCC's data overstates coverage. It overstates coverage for a lot of reasons. It overstates, we just looked at that chart. It overstates coverage because the way that the FCC asks for the data overstates coverage. The FCC asks for the providers to state advertised speeds. They ask for the providers to indicate, not just what you do serve, but what you can serve. It asks for the providers to indicate, full coverage, if you touch a block, not just, so it implies, the definitions that the FCC puts out implies states over coverage. But even by those standards, the FCC's data shows that only 85% of Idaho has access to those speeds. And and the FCC's data, based on the FCC's data, it shows that only 58% of rural Idaho has access to those speeds. So even the FCC's generous data in the FCC's annual report shows that only 58% of rural Idaho has access to those speeds. I wondered why, when I looked at the charts, we didn't see more cell phone coverage in rural Idaho. And then I understood it when I saw this chart, because when you look at the FCC's data, if I look at their mobile LTE coverage at 10 megabits down, 3 megabits up, the FCC's data shows that only 43% of rural Idaho has access to mobile LTE at a rate of 10 megabits down and 3 megabits up. So, and that's based on the FCC's coverage data. Next slide. The next slide is a preview of coming attractions. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, but I wanted to tell you what we have coming after the 5-minute break. After the 5-minute break, we're going to talk about tools. And so I will stay on, well, I'll take a quick break, but then I'll stay on to answer any questions that people have. But we're going to take a 5-minute break. But when we come back, I'm going to talk about how you can get this data yourself and how you can use the data. You can get your own data for your own community and how you can use it as part of your plans. And we're going to explore all of these tools for you. But now it's time for a 5-minute break.
And Karen, just before we break, if I can chime in, good morning, everyone. This is Scott Woods with NTIA Broadband USA. I put this in the chat, and I think Karen's done a really good job of providing an overview of sort of the available data sets that are currently available for you. But I did want to add that we are aware of the controversy, if you will, or at least the inherent data methodology flaws of the FCC relying on carrier reported data, that those are advertised, that those are advertised speeds and advertised coverage areas covering both census blocks and tracks, and not necessarily what you know to be true, both actually and anecdotally when we talk to folks on the ground. So this next phase, what we're really going to focus on is, again, that more granular data, how you can validate what you folks already know about your community. And so we'll get more into that. But again, that FCC data is a good starting point to figure out which carriers are at least reporting that they're operating in your area. But I would not use that as a level of the quality of that service or the accuracy of what they're reporting and representing therein. So just wanted to put that caveat in there, but is a good starting point. So when we come back from the break, we'll definitely talk more about the actual data tools that you can use to evaluate and validate what you folks already know about what's going on in the community. So thank you, Karen, for letting me put that caveat in there.
Do you want to put up my pretty slide with the 5-minute picture? Angie, is there a way that I configure it so that I can, I'll do it this way. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we'll get started again. Now I'd like to give you an overview of some of the tools that you can use to access not just the data that I've given you an overview of, but actually some additional data that you can use to support your broadband planning. I'm going to talk about the 3 data sets I talked about, but I'm going to talk about some federal tools, but I'm also going to go beyond the federal tools and highlight some external tools. The tools that have an asterisk next to them are external tools. The NTIA does not endorse those tools, but I'm giving you access and mentioning them here because many of our partners use the tools and they're helpful. And so I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that I'm mixing both federal tools and external tools in this presentation because it's useful, but that NTIA does not necessarily endorse those tools. So we're going to give a quick overview of a lot of tools and make sure when you get this presentation, which will be coming right after this overview, you'll have links to all of them. I'm only going to demo some of them during the presentation. And as Angie said, when we do our workshop on the 17th, you're going to have more time to make sure that we really go into your data in detail and explore it so that we make sure that you get all your questions answered. The first one that I wanted to mention is the NTIA Data Central. This is the first data set that I talked about, which is the NTIA Internet Use Survey. There's a lot of components to our Data Central tool. We have our own blog, a research center, and my favorite is the Data Explorer. The Data Explorer tool is a place where you can go to where you can just kind of like tweak the tools to look at a map of the US where you can zoom into Idaho and get data on just the state of Idaho, but you can also use a drop-down tool to look at internet use by age, or you can look at internet use by race and ethnicity, or location of use by age, or by disability status. So you can take kind of any of those components of that survey and you can explore it by the different component parts. And you can just play around with the data and explore it yourself very, very easily. So it's just an easy place to explore the data. The Research Center, you can download the data, and it also has sample code. And the blog, you can just read about different analysis we've done on the data. One of the nicest parts about this whole set is that there's an email address, and the email address really goes to, it has a fancy email name, but it really goes to a guy named Rafi Goldberg. And Rafi is like one of the nicest people at NTIA, and he will answer any question you ever send him with the most thoughtful and wonderful explanation you'll ever get. So I highly recommend, if you have a question, you can just send it to Rafi. If you have any questions, he will answer them. He's spectacular to work with. I told you the second data set was the American Community Survey. And the American Community Survey, the way you access that data is by data.census.gov. And the US Census Bureau has recently kind of renovated the access to their data. And they wanted to make it easy for you to access all of the census data in one place. And so they put a new portal together called data.census.gov. And they've been steadily improving this tool. And so all you do is you go to data.census.gov, and you can just go into that search bar and you can put in internet, and you can put in the name of your community, and you'll get information on internet and the name of your community. I put in a number of links on this page, the ACS homepage, data.census.gov, and I also put in a link to a page called Census Academy. Census Academy, if you're really a data junkie, is a place where you can go and you can get access to the training that the US Census Bureau offers. So if you want to go to one of their webinars, they have short ones and they have long ones. So you can listen to a 15-minute webinar or a 5-minute webinar, and you can get more information on how to access their tools. I find their tools very comprehensive / somewhat intimidating. And so to really get the full power of them, it's sometimes helpful to do some of their Census Academy tools. But at the very simplest level, if you go to data.census.gov and you put in the toolbar S2801 or S2802 and the name of your community, Idaho County or Shoshone County, you'll get the whole table for internet access, internet and computer access. So that's the name. Those are the two key tables that we've talked about: types of computers and internet subscriptions, and internet subscriptions and selected characteristics. If you just put in those two table characteristics, those two table numbers, and the name of the community you want, you're going to get the table. So that's kind of the shortcut to get my favorite tables. So you don't really have to do everything. If you just do that, you'll get the full table with all the data that we just talked about. The other thing that I want to talk about, it's not really broadband data, but it's just too good for me to not mention it. It's called Quick Facts. So Quick Facts is Quick Facts from the US Census Bureau. And so what Quick Facts is well, I'm going to have to show you this one. Can you see it? Okay. So what Quick Facts is it Wardner? W-A-R?
D-N-E-R.
D-N-E-R? What did I spell? W-A-R?
Yep, D-N-E-R.
Okay, I'm going to have to go up to Shoshone.
They may put Wardner in with Kellogg. It shares a zip code.
We'd have to kill them if they do that.
I didn't test this ahead of time. Let me go up to Shoshone. Help me spell Shoshone.
S-H-O-S-H-O-N-E.
S-H-O-S-H. There we go. I already put it in for the other one, I'll tell you that. Okay, did I get that? Yes. Okay, so if I put in Shoshone County, Idaho, I get Quick Facts from the US Census Bureau. And what Quick Facts is quick facts on a lot of the information that's in the American Community Survey. So I'm showing here Shoshone and the United States, but let's just say I put in Idaho too. So now I could compare Idaho to Shoshone to the United States. And if I wanted, I could put another county in and I could compare them together. And so I can look at population, age, race and ethnicity, population like veterans, housing, living arrangements like number of households, persons per households. So the number of people in the households, languages spoken. Here's where the computer information is. So households with a computer, households with a subscription, education level. There's some health information. Here's some economy information, transportation information, income information. There's some business information and geography information. So quite a bit of information, and it's just a snapshot of information. So quick information if you're developing a business case. I pull this up on my phone when I'm having an argument with my husband. You know, he'll say Boston is bigger than Seattle. I'll say Seattle is bigger than Boston. We pull it up on the phone. He's always right. You know, it just like, you know, it's just so easy to pull this information up when you need quick facts on a community. I still can't remember which one's bigger. So I also put another link here just because it's so fun. And this is the Household Pulse Survey dashboard. I mentioned that the US Census Bureau has been doing these pulse surveys. These are really quick surveys that they've been doing during COVID times to get just quick information about what's going on in the country during COVID times. And they have a really interesting dashboard where they put that information up. And this is quick information that they're doing I think it's every week, and their dashboard is very interactive and very easy to look at. So you can go and check that dashboard out if you would like. We've talked quite a bit about speed tests at really almost all of our presentations. This is not government data, but it is pretty heavily used. The FCC does use speed tests. We really endorse speed tests as complementary elements of any broadband planning. And we've talked about the elements of a speed test. The two most popular speed tests are the UCLA speed tests and the MLab speed tests. They're both very, very similar. So the UCLA speed test, they both use they both provide upload speed, download speed, latency, and retransmission or ping. The UCLA speed test is ad supported, and the good thing about that is that it provides sub-census tract level data. They have limited public reporting of their data, but they have very detailed level data that is available for purchase. And NTIA is one of the clients of that data. We purchase it, and we use that data as part of one of our most major projects, which is called the National Broadband Availability Map, which I'm going to tell you more about in just a minute. And then the MLab tool is an open source tool, partially because it's open source. When you do an MLab test, you do have to accept a privacy, accept their privacy policy. Because it's open source, so if you go to their website, you'll find a lot of maps and visualizations that are available to the public. And a lot of their data is open and available to use. And we also use the MLab data as part of our National Broadband Availability Map. So both of them are really wonderful speed tests. They each have kind of different strengths, and that's one of the reasons why we leverage both of them in our NBAM tool. This gives me a nice opportunity to tell you a little bit about our NBAM tool. It's one of the projects that we're most excited about. It's a multi-year program, and the purpose of it is to improve our understanding of broadband as a way to improve the ability to invest in broadband. So, you know, as Scott mentioned, you know, the FCC broadband data has its limitations. And one of the reasons I think people complain the most about the FCC data is not because it has its limitations, but because it's tied to investment. You know, one of the ways that we started our conversation was we talked about the $16 billion RDOF fund, which is connected in some regards to the FCC data set. And so, you know, people wouldn't complain so much about it if it wasn't tied to so much money. And so what Congress asked us to do is build on top of that data set and add additional layers of data in order to support both federal agencies and state agencies to develop a stronger and more accurate way to invest federal and state funding. And so the National Broadband Availability Map is a program that will improve our ability to target investment in broadband. And we're layering additional data sets on top of those data together to improve that funding. And one of the data sets we're layering on top is speed test data. And so we use the FCC Form 477 data, we use the UCLA and the MLab speed test data, we use the ACS data, and we have partnerships with a number of states in order to use their data in order to improve their speed test data, including Nevada as well as with Idaho. Not Nevada yet, Idaho. So we started with 8 pilots, and now we have 22 states on board. We already have partnerships with USDA, EDA, and with the Appalachian Regional Commission, and we are also working with more federal agencies. The reason we didn't talk with you about this too much earlier is that it's not directly available to the public. Because it has so many proprietary data sets in it, we require an memorandum of understanding in order for our partners to use it. So Eric Forsch will have access to it, and he'll be able to, on your behalf, be able to use it in order to support broadband planning. But these members of this call won't be able to have direct access. Now, Scott usually helps me on this. So Scott, have I missed something here?
No, you haven't. I'm answering the question about the retransmission. There was a question about the retransmission, what that means in the context of a speed test. I'm about to answer that question. But I would just, for everyone, I wanted to talk about very briefly about our M-band program. It is not going to be publicly available, but it is for state and federal level policymakers. So if you recall, if you had attended some of our earlier sessions, Eric Forsch, who's the state broadband director, we're in discussions with Idaho for Idaho to be a part of the M-band. And so upon successful inclusion, Eric will have the access to our M-band data as he directs some investments on behalf of the state of Idaho and the Idaho Broadband Task Force. So great news, and we look forward to sharing that information and data very soon.
One derivative product that did come out of our partnership with Esri, which is the platform for NBAM, is a mapping tool that is a broadband availability and digital equity map, which is available to the public. And I'll leave the link in here for you. And it's a map that does show broadband availability and COVID access. And that map is available that you can look it up. And I'll put that one in here for you. But I'm going to go back to speed tests because, as I mentioned, they're available as a way to kind of look. It's a kind of another cut on broadband that you can see for your community, but it's also a win whenever you do a speed test. That information eventually ends up in NBAM. But speed tests, you know, every data set, you know, I think one reason why every data set has its pluses and its minuses. And I think it's important, you know, with the FCC data, with the ACS data, as well as with speed tests, you can't ask for any data set to do more than it's meant to do, you know, so it's important to realize that every data set has its limitations. So let's talk a little bit about how to use a speed test. And so when you're using a speed test, you should close extraneous applications. I'm going to ask you to run a speed test, and Angie's going to put the link in the chat. But in this case, don't close your Zoom because we don't want to lose you. But in general, when you do a speed test, you should close your applications. There's no reason why you can't run both speed tests. It doesn't hurt to run either speedtest.net or either your Ookla speed test or the MLab speed tests. You know, it doesn't hurt to try. They both are going to run to different servers, so you can get two different perspectives. And it never hurts to get, you know, it's like getting a second opinion on your speed test. If you're running your speed test at home, there's a difference between running it on your Wi-Fi and running it at the place where the internet comes into your house. So if you run the space where the internet comes into your house, like at the Cat5 or, you know, where your cable kind of connects into your house, then you're measuring what service is delivered into your house. Then you're really measuring what you bought, you know, versus what you're kind of operating on at your house. So if you want to measure what you're buying, what you're paying for, you really have to measure it at the place where the internet connection comes into your house. If you run the test using your Wi-Fi, you're testing not what you're buying, you're testing your home network. So definitely be aware of that. So a few tips on running your test: run it at different times of the day, run it directly at the house, and run it with your Wi-Fi. run it using different devices because you'll be testing different things. Run using both of the different speed tests. And just a note, if you don't get a result, which sometimes happens when people particularly are using some satellite apps, some satellite connections, what does that mean? It might mean that your latency was too much. So this would be a good time to run a speed test. And I think we've got a question for you after you run your speed test. What did you get? Oh, can I see it? And we have a question for you. We have a question about your speed test result. We want to know if you've taken, now that you've taken your speed test, we want to know how it compares to what you subscribe to. Did you get something better than what you subscribed to? A lot more than you subscribe to? Because some of you have about what you subscribe to, less than what you subscribe to, or way under. And actually, you know, Angie, we should have added I don't know, because a lot of people don't know what they subscribe to. So that's what we forgot to add on this one. Dorian, you better give me the zip code for Shoshone, or for Warden.
Might be one for Colleen. I can't quite, or Ron. I can't quite remember what Kellogg's is and Wardner's off the top of my head.
Wardner and Kellogg are under the same one. It's 83837. Shoshone County's got a multitude of
83837. Okay. Okay, you want to call our poll? About what I subscribe to. Good. But some people did get less. Nobody exceeded expectations in this poll. All right. Okay, I'm going to highlight a couple more tools before we wrap up for a few more questions. And this tool Dorian's going to help me on. I should have told you right at the beginning that that when I started to put this presentation to talk about tools, I really only wanted to talk about a couple of them, but everybody else had favorites that they wanted me to talk about, and so I had to add a few extra tools in, and this one was one of Dorian's favorites. So so BroadbandNow is a tool that that's pretty unique because it includes really a lot of consumer information about broadband. In particular, it has information on broadband providers, including pricing information. It also has speed test data and comparative rankings of the providers. It has the speed test data in BroadbandNow comes from MLab, but one of the things that makes BroadbandNow very unique is that it's one of the few sites that has pricing information, and you can also order your service directly from BroadbandNow, and it has reviews of the different service providers. One of the things that is it's an independent site, but the site is supported through commissions from the internet service providers. So it's got a lot of data in it. It's got coverage maps, it's got service tiers, it's got availability information, it's got pricing tiers on it, and we're going to just take a quick look at it right now. So all you have to do for this one is very simple, is you just enter in your zip code. And you can see you can choose residential, or you can just show business results, and you hit search.
Karen, your internet's slower than mine.
Apparently so. Give me another zip code.
$83850.
I promise I'm going to get to your neighborhood later on, because I've got it all set up for my third demo. No surprise, because we already talked about satellite. It shows satellite right up front as the first couple of options, Viasat and HughesNet, with pricing information. And it shows the service providers with their plans and phone numbers, Suddenlink, ZipLink. And then here it shows kind of a summary of internet access. The average download speed in Pinehurst is 9.9 megahertz, which is slower than the average in Idaho. And it has some kind of qualitative information based on the surveys. Approximately 800 people in Shoshone don't have access to any wired internet. So quite a bit of qualitative information. And Dorian, you had a comment about this site.
Right. So when my family and I recently moved just a little bit north from where we lived near Athol recently, we moved from Athol up to near Sagal, Idaho, which for those of you that aren't aware of where exactly that is, that's just north of Coeur d'Alene, north of Silverwood. And, you know, it's just rural enough that we just weren't sure exactly who all the providers were. And so this is before we had been working with NTIA, BroadbandUSA folks, and I had been doing some research on broadband for the program that Seed and PAC that we've been working on together, and had run across the broadbandnow.com resource. And so I thought, well, I'll just check it out, and did some research, and you know, went ahead and looked online and saw who the providers were in my area. So as a consumer, it was very helpful to me to see in one place where all the ISPs were for the area that I was going to be moving to, and to see all the different plans that were available. You know, you can kind of compare their speeds. Of course, these are their advertised speeds and everything, but it just was a really great starting place, because then I could kind of go out and ask, you know, the neighbors in the area, hey, who do you use and who do you like? And then, you know, go to the Facebook group that I'm in for Sagal community and ask, you know, hey, I'm looking at these two different ISPs. Which one, you know, do you folks recommend in the area? And was able to make a really informed decision. So, like I said, as a consumer, it's for sure a really great resource. And so I guess that's why I piped up when Karen had mentioned it, because like, oh, I used that. That was so helpful for me. So I would recommend it if somebody's looking for a new service or is new to an area.
And I have one more I wanted to cover, and I do have to say, this is probably the one that I use the most. So I want you to just take a deep breath, because this is the home stretch. And I'm doing my favorite one last. And so this is the i3 Connectivity Explorer. Notice that place is in the middle. So that's your place, your town, your tribal area, your county, your community. And what is on the outside are sort of all of the demographic information, adoption and use, provider data, speed test information. And so what i3 does is it takes most of the information we've talked about, speed test information, demographic information, adoption and use information, even opportunity zones, qualified tracks, wireline data, FCC mobile and wireline data, ACS adoption and use FCC data, all of that information, and it shows it to you in the context of your place. Information on where schools and libraries are, but all of it is available for you in the context of place. I'm going to jump to the demo, but I want to also show you that in your slide deck, I've included a number of slides that tell you how to set up your own account, so that when you get the slide deck, you'll have slides that tell you how to set up your own account so that you can easily jump to doing that. Okay, so for this one, I did already set up Wardener. So I've set up Wardener right here. So when you open it up, I'll log right out again so we get started here at the beginning. So this is the place space beginning here. And then as you log in, you're at your community level, and you have just base information at the beginning on population, area, density, community. And you kind of know you're in the right place because you've got your town here, and you can kind of see where you are. Usually the first place that I go to is I want to go to providers. And so this gives me a list of the providers in the area, and you can sort it a number of different ways. You can also always go to about the data, and this tells you what data you're looking at. So this is the FCC Form 477 data, and this tells you the vintage. So this tells you that we're looking at the most recent data, which is the December 2019 data. And this was just uploaded in here about 2 weeks ago. You can sort it a lot of different ways. And I like the any form, but if I wanted, I could just look at slower than 10.1 or, 100 megabits or faster, which wouldn't get me much here, I think. But so you can look at it any different ways. I can include or exclude satellite providers, so I've just added them in. I can look at home providers, or if I wanted to, I could look at the business providers. I can look at the block level, or I can look at the block group level. So remember I told you how I read the table across. So I'm looking at HughesNet. It's a satellite provider. They support 19 blocks. That's they're advertising 25 meg down, 3 meg up. If I wanted to jump from Wardener up to Shoshone, all I have to do is go over here and zoom out. And now I'm in Shoshone County, and I've got Viasat, 3,000 blocks, 100% of the county, 100 meg, 3 meg. But I told you that I really like the the ACS data. So the ACS data, let's look at it let's look at it in percent. So the percent level says, if you look at it in percent level for wireline, if you say who has a wireline subscription, for Idaho, it's 61%. For Shoshone, 50%. You want me to go back down? For wireline, it's, for the US, for wireline, it's 67%. For Idaho, 61%. For Wardner, it's 67%. So what are you doing instead? Satellite service, 19%. So go down to the bottom. Who has no internet access? 21%. Compared to Idaho overall, 15.8%, 15.6%. So where are those? You're going to get a better picture if I go up to the county level. So I'm going to go onto the map here. If I look at the map here, and I know you're going to tell me that this is rural, and I'll certainly understand that. For the wireline subscription, 42% of people in this area have wireline. And I'm sure it's a density issue. So I'll look at a secondary characteristic. It's because it's 2 people per square mile. But here in town, it's 35 people per square mile, where 56% of the people have wireline access. And over here, it's 53 people per square mile, where 52% of the people have wireline access. So that's kind of one level of information. We could also look at devices. We could also go up to it'll take me a minute because I didn't load this morning. We could also go up to the state level as well. So if we look at the state level, again, you can look at wireline access. You can look at wireline access at the state level. Again, we're looking almost county level at who has wireline access, or you could look at who's got cell phone data plan only, which is going to be poor because we know that the cell phone data coverage is poor. So huge amount of information, and in all cases you can add these secondary data, poverty level, Native American density, etc. So you can explore a lot of information. You can also explore income level, etc. And all of that, it's information. Usually you can get speed test data, but the speed test data, I got to tell you, is not coming up very quickly today, so I'm not going to show you that right now. Let me jump back to here. When you want to explore on your own, you can just create your own account. And you'll be able to set up a notebook for your community with whatever you would like, and add a locality, and then set up the notebook in any way that you would like. I wanted to let you know that we have a worksheet for you to do when you are on your own or when you get together on the 17th. And part of the focus of the worksheet isn't really about what data you find, it's about thinking about how that data tells this, how you can use that data to tell your own story, and how you can use that data to make the case for investment. So I do think we have time for questions, but we also have time to think a little bit about the future. But before I do that, I want to remind you that we have a pretty important work session scheduled for the 17th. It's important because it's an opportunity for us to explore the data, but we also have made sure that we also have time to talk about the RDOF fund if you would like to talk about that as well. Angie or anybody else?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And definitely be sure and join us for that workshop on the 17th. And we're very pleased that Karen and Dawn and Scott will also be there to kind of take some of these data and RDOF questions. So if you're planning to join us and you'd like us to focus specifically on some data in your community, this is a really great opportunity, and maybe let Dorian or I know in advance if there's something about your community or a specific zip code or area you'd really like to focus on in that session. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? I think I went through the last piece of data a little bit quickly, so sorry about that.
There was a question from Jerry Kathy that I'm not sure got answered, and I can't find it in the chat right now. Jerry, do you want to, I don't know if you can get on enough to ask the question.
Yeah, he did. Scott did answer it, Christine.
Did he? Okay, there's just a lot of chat going on. I couldn't quite follow it all. So great. I'm glad you got your question answered.
All right. I know that people's heads are spinning, so there's a lot of information to take in. So we do appreciate your time today.
Oh, we do have a question in the chat here, Karen. Somebody's on the I3 site and they can't find the city of Pinehurst within Shoshone County. Is there a trick to finding some of these smaller communities?
So let's see, the trick is you go to you go place and then Idaho. A community or a town is called a place in census language. So you go to set up a notebook and then you call it a place, and then if it exists in census as a place, then it would be here. And then you search like that. And it does exist as a place in census. And so you add it then as a locality. Oh, I didn't need to add another one. I got nervous. And then you activate your notebook. I think I'm getting tired here. I'm up in Idaho, so I just have to go down. So I didn't walk you through that quite that well, but the trick was that you go to the steps were written up in the note, but you go to new notebook and add community. You call it a place, and you go to add locality, and then you just type in Pinehurst. The trick is calling it a place.
Oh.
It's a place. Communities and towns are places. And then there is Pinehurst. We can look at
Karen, I had a question about that too, because I had gotten on to look up my area, and I had a hard time looking up the city of Sagal. Technically, Sagal is not it's not incorporated. Does that make a difference?
Yeah, not everything is a place in census language, so you won't find all places. It has to be a place in the census language. But if you kind of mess around with it, you'll be able to eventually figure it out. Like if you look it up and then you look up the places around there, like, and find out where the holes are. Like sometimes I'll look up things and look and say, why is there a hole in this town? What is it? What else? What do I have to kind of figure out to try to find it? You'll be able to kind of figure it out. Sometimes it's a subdivision or unincorporated area. It's hard to figure out how your town incorporates things. There might be a place that you go to in your town to figure out how the census, how they define things. I haven't figured that out. But what this one is telling you is that in Pinehurst, there are 10% of the blocks have 3 providers, and 21% of the blocks have no providers with 25/3, and 68% of the blocks have 2 providers with 25/3 service. So I only showed you a few of the slides. There are tons and tons of different things that we could have looked at here, but I knew we were getting late on time. There's lots and lots of things that you'll be able to explore and that we will go into in more detail when we have an opportunity to. So there's much more. Angie, you want to wrap us up?
You bet. All right. So thank you for taking the time today. Please do remember our technical assistance discussion on the 17th. Send Dorian or I an email if you would like the Zoom link to that one. We'd like to make sure that we thank our funders for this. The Vista Foundation at Innovia, as well as USDA Rural Community Development Initiative and CETA Impact membership provided the funding behind this. And thank you so much to our BroadbandUSA folks for all the wonderful work that they have done to put this together. We appreciate it so much. And I will be sending a follow-up email with today's recording, the slide deck, information for the 17th, as well as information to register for our upcoming workshop series. And the next one is federal funding resources, bright and early in 2021. So be sure and join us.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.